an earlier interim report. Well, I guess it'll tell us. It's like 1960s, 1966. Of course, for those of you who need a little brush up on American history, the Civil War is from 1960 to 1965. Around, there's a little bit of pre-conflict that, of course, happened with the secession. Let's go ahead and check our sources here. First shots on Fort Sumter are fired just before sunrise on April 12th, 1861. Okie doke. And the South secedes. On December 20th, 1860. Okay, so that is when the South says that it officially secedes from the United States of America, and then they have a war about it to check. There's a few months before the shots that are fired on Fort Sumter, where it's not a physical war. No one is dying, no one is getting shot. But then after that, it's horrifically bloody for the next 4 years. Okie doke. So, this is the final report of the U.S. Civil War Centennial Commission that follows an earlier interim report submitted in 1966 to Congress. It is fitting that the officers of the National Commission should say a few words in the spirit in which the Commission approached this task on the special advantages and disadvantages of the time chosen for the Centennial commemoration, and on what the Commission believes to have been its central accomplishment, and on what it thinks to have been the main reasons for any failures. So my voice is a little weird today. Again, we have to say, this is not a recreation of the piece, although I think it's publicly available. I think it's a matter of public domain because it's a government work and should be available through the Freedom of Information Act. But just in case we need to dodge any copyrights, this is for educational purposes only. This is not a one-to-one recreation, cannot be used as a substitute for the original work because I'm talking through the entire thing, and no one likes that to be part of their book, to have just some college student talking through some undergraduate just saying what they think through the entire thing. Okay, so let's keep going. These initial observations are tentative and subject to elaboration, but they may be helpful in defining some of the facts and ideas later presented more fully in the body of the report. The Commission approached the Centennial with a deep appreciation for the opportunity and its commemorations would offer, not alone in teaching history and in illustrating lessons in patriotism and in heroic devotion to principle, but also in emphasizing the importance of national union and the necessity of maintaining our land of varied sections, states, and localities as a union, one indivisible in sentiment and loyalty. Those members of the Commission best versed in history were equally anxious that the commemorations of a war that resulted in emancipation and in the guarantees of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments upon freedom, civil rights, and suffrage should be held in such manner as to strengthen the social and moral solidarity of the Republic. Yeah, those members of the Commission best versed in history. I agree. When you learn a bunch of history, it makes you really, really pay attention to civil rights and social rights as a concept, especially in America. American history is full of these little distinctions in who really gets to be a citizen or not, often based on race. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how prevalent that is in other countries' history. I know that other countries certainly aren't perfect in this regard as well, and even modernly, there are lots of countries that are otherwise really, really nice, except if you want to become one of their citizens, at which point they put up a bunch of barriers to letting you join. All right, the National Commission had the advantage of beginning its labors as a great wave of popular interest in the Civil War, its dramatic events, and its eminent personages north and south, and its manifold social and economic developments were rising throughout the nation. It had the disadvantage of doing its work while a new crisis in a long history of racial irritations in America gripped parts of the country, presenting embarrassments that could only be avoided with anxious precaution and tact. The fact that they were avoided is credible to the good sense and good temper of the great mass of the people. All right, so I wrote a comment here that was, I'll just read it. It's indicative of the perspective that this report is written from, that the civil rights movement and its backlash are seen as a crisis rather than the persistent horror of Jim Crow laws. This creates an embarrassment to be avoided rather than a truth to be addressed, and a long history of racism and oppression is labeled as racial irritation. So there's a lot of control in the language that's occurring around these ideas. First of all, it's extremely centrist. It's holding up the status quo of over 100 years, well, probably less, like probably 90 years of pretty direct, horrific abuse on the part of Southern governments towards anyone who isn't white, and as a like normal state that is being uprooted by the crisis of civil rights and the reactionary, I guess this will be the time where I mean the like overtly evil reactionary racist policies that stood up to people asking for rights that they fought for and deserve, and that several African American Southerners died in the Civil War to earn in the first place, that were then subsequently eroded and taken away in the following decades. Which is one of the great tragedies of American history, is it happened, they fixed it, and then slowly they started doing it again. And nobody could stop them. Nobody wanted to stop them. And now, finally, in 1960, we had progressive enough politicians that would stand up to the South and did want to stop them and had the political power to integrate their schools and to end segregation. And that created its own political backlash in the Dixiecrats, who wanted to break off again from the political Democratic Party. At least they didn't start a war over it, but they, were threatening to start a political revolution over it within the Democratic Party. Okay, or at least a third political party in America. All right, the fact that they were so national and state and local Centennial commissions and committees were themselves composed of men and women who, in a self-sacrificing spirit, gave endless amounts of time, thought, and toil to the commemorations with no thought of any compensation, but to the satisfaction of duty alone. They were gratified to find that in every community, from the Canadian line to the Gulf of Mexico, great numbers of people were eager to relinquish their wanted occupations and to apply their best thoughts and energies to the solemn task of memorializing the generation that met this terrible sacrifices of life and treasure required in the years between 1861 and 1865, and to the still more solemn task of rededicating the present and the coming generations to the noblest purposes of the Republic. Yeah, interesting it doesn't say what those purposes are, because it didn't want to piss off all the South senators and congressmen, because the noblest purposes of the Republic should be anti-segregation at this time period. But if you said that, they would be politically inflammatory to many of the politicians of the South. So interesting tiptoeing there. Seldom, if in our peacetime history, it has such a multitude of our best citizens given so freely of their time, ideas, and efforts for a large public undertaking rooted in the reverence of our common past. Common past is a little interesting here, because it wouldn't be our common past if the South had won. You know what I'm saying? because the North won, we're like, okay, now we're part of the Union again. This is like all of our struggles together. But the South was like, hey, we want to be a different country so we can keep doing slavery. How about we don't do your country? It's an interesting alternative history you could write a bunch of books about, is what if the South had won. All right. Members of the National Commission will ever regard as their proudest accomplishment the part they played in helping evoke and guide the spontaneous manifestation of nationwide feeling. Yeah, interesting they're focusing on the feeling rather than any of the like underlying like realities of the horror of slavery and how it's good that it's over and how like racial equality is extremely important. They don't say that. They just talk about the feelings. Not that feelings are bad. It's just that like the feelings should be about things. They should be about the stuff that happened in history, rather than like letting the South get this celebration free of charge and kind of let them off the hook for all their extremely racist actions in their own history when they were part of the United States again after 1877, around when Reconstruction ended. All right. This report attempts to make it clear that the National Commission claims no special credit for such successes as marked various parts of the Centennial. The Commission could have accomplished nothing without the support so far-sighted and generous of both houses of Congress and the successive presidents of the United States, of state and local Centennial Commissions all over the land, and of the great mass of citizens, humble and distinguished, of whom we have just spoken. All right, let's talk about what presidents they're referring to here. So 1860. And 1960, sorry. Dwight D. Eisenhower is president in 1960. So Dwight D. Eisenhower is president from 1953 to 1961. After that, it's John F. Kennedy from 1961 to 1963, when he is, of course, famously assassinated. And then it's Lyndon B. Johnson from 1963 to 1965, finishing out Kennedy's term. And then he runs again for himself in 1965 to 1969. Lyndon B. Johnson has a bunch of documentaries that are for free, I think on the American Experience Project. With PBS, and it's really, really good. He's not a perfect figure. I mean, none of these people are perfect figures. John F. Kennedy gets martyred very strongly, but like we have to understand the like sexual, like rife lewdness and sexuality that was in the White House at this time. Kennedy and Johnson, or rather, I think it was Kennedy's brother and Johnson, famously had a bet to see how many women they could have sex with in the White House during their time at the White House. It was disgusting. Supposedly the number got over 70, which, speaks about power and sexuality, and also the 60s, and also just like, I don't know, the human state. But maybe they're all just sluts. Maybe they're all down for it, Maybe everyone's cool with it. As long as they clear with their partners and it's consensual, then, it's one of those things. I mean, many of the political marriages are extremely hollow anyway, and, don't actually feature much. I mean, it doesn't have to. I'll just say that. There's plenty of hollowed out relationship things in politics. But, unless you're there, you don't really know what's going on. And unless we read all the letters and do really good biographical history, there's also that. But I haven't studied nearly enough to understand those things. I know that Marilyn Monroe famously, like, was one of the flings that John F. Kennedy had, where he took often to San Diego, to Hotel del Coronado, which is right where I used to live and grow up. And it's a very romantic location, I have to say. All right. I see why the President of the United States took a famous movie star there. And then there's, of course, the whole history of how Marilyn Monroe died, which is like very contentious. Lots of assassinations in the 60s, you know? But that I'll leave that to a different historian. But let's go back to the commission. Okay, the Nationwide Commission is well aware that, like all such bodies, it must confess to its share of failures and shortcomings, some of which this report describes in details. It offers no excuses. It begs merely to state that some of them proceeded from an excess of good intentions and from a zealous attempt to do too much with too little, or too little in time. For time is always short. Too little in money, for although Congress was generous, it was natural to depend heavily upon unpaid services. Too little in trained personnel, for experts are often hard to find, and too little in thought and thoughtful planning. Well, okay, so experts are hard to find when you don't pay them. I'll just say that. Like, you know, there's lots of people who study history a lot and could do great work, but you know, if you're not going to even pay them, that's, I don't know. I guess the project is too big, right? A whole nation undergoing a massive commemoration like this it's a very large thing. Okay, but let's continue. And too little in thoughtful planning, we submit only that it is better to err from attempting too much than from attempting too little, for we hold with Browning that a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what is heaven for? Ha! That's it. I want to save that. For we hold with Browning that a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what else is heaven for? The heaven of a long-desired self-expression in good cause. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all trying to do, right? I mean, not all of us, but that's what I'm trying to do, at least, is get a good job doing art. Passionate, important art that is needed. And it is needed. That's the thing that keeps, one of the great things that keeps me going is the constant reminder of how poorly this subject can be done, and striving always to do it a little bit better each day for myself. That's why we're reading. That's why we're talking. That's why we're speaking. That's why we're making the things we make. All right, in closing, we tender our thanks to a patient support and friendly aid to the Congress and to the other agencies of our government, and above all to the people of the United States. From Alan Nevins, Chairman of the U.S. Civil War Centennial Commission. The origin and object of the Commission. When Congress in 1957 and by Public Law 85 through 105 created the U.S. Civil War Centennial Commission, it was responding to an unmistakable demand on the part of the American people. It had become clear that a great variety of agencies, public and private, were determined to mark the centennial of that struggle that waged during the agonizing years of 1861 and 1865, and given a final decision not only upon the indissolubility of the Union, so the inability to dissolve it, but also upon the impossibility of reconciling the continuance of slavery with the basic principles of American freedom and justice. Okay, so at least they're acknowledging that it was about slavery and it was about ending slavery. It was a struggle that, in the course of mobilizing the nation's energies, military, economic, and social, had transformed all American life. The centenary would clearly be observed north and south, east and west, with a deep feeling and a spontaneous manifestation of patriotic sentiment. Okay, interesting. I mean, the United States did win the war. Patriotic sentiment in the South, I think, might be a little muddled. I mean, interesting what, and yeah, I mean, I might make a comment that's just, I'm curious what type of patriotism is, would be expressed. Um, yeah, let's just make that a thing, a comment on the class. Curious what exactly, what type of sentiment patriotic is actually being expressed by Southern whites during this um, commemoration. I guess it's the duality of American political reality is that it's the United States, right? There is a state that you are participating in and sharing the laws of, and then there's the wider federal government on top of that. So when you're patriotic to the United States, you could be patriotic to your state more than you're patriotic to your federal government. And because this is a federal commission, um, I wonder if they miss that when people are waving the American flag, it might not be for the same reasons as um, the federal government wants. For example, they could be waving it for their star in that flag rather than the Union itself being the first thing that they care about. Um, so, especially when Confederate battle flags are flying over the state house of the Southern, um, when a Confederate battle flag is flying over the state house in um, 1960. So let's check when the Confederate battle flag flew over South Carolina. The Confederate flag flies over the state capitol building in South Carolina on February 18th, 2000. Oh, really? Confederate flag raised at the again at the state house is the third time the party has raised the flag in front of the state house, each July 10th since the flag was removed. Wow, this is 2018. Okay. Okay. The Confederate flag wasn't flown at the Carolina State House in 1961. This is PolitiFact.com. I'm not sure how reputable this is. By Eugene Robinson. It's flown as a symbol of massive resistance to radical desegregation by Eugene Robinson. Huh. So this is 2015. Um, This is a brutal shooting of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. For some, the flag is a symbol of a shared Southern heritage. For others, the flag is linked to a Confederate war memorial, which sits next to it and honors the fallen Confederate soldiers. And others, such as Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson, see the flag as a symbol for racial oppression and prejudice. Do you know when the flag was first flown in the Columbia State House in Columbia? He asked during an interview to Meet the Press, June 21st, 1961. Yeah, I think that's right. It's flown there as a symbol to massive resistance for racial desegregation. It was only after Brown versus Board, after Little Rock and desegregation began, that the South Carolinians started putting the flag on the state house, and other states in the South adopted it as the battle flag as part of their state's flags. So it was a massive resistance. Here we wanted to answer the two questions. When did the Confederate battle flag first fly over South Carolina? Daniel Hollins, a member of the commission responsible for planning South Carolina's Confederate War Centennial, recalled the exact day the flag was first hoisted during an interview published in 1999. Well, it said the flag itself went up in April 11th, 1961, for the opening of the Civil War Centennial. At the request of Aiken Representative John A. May. May told us that he was going to introduce a resolution to fly the flag for a year from the Capitol. I was against the flag going up, Hollis said, but I kept quiet and went along. The resolution was approved in 1962, but never included a date for the flag's removal. It just stayed up, Hollis said. Nobody ever raised a question. Hollis died in 2008. The flag's changing meaning. So yes, the flag didn't start flying until 100 years after the Civil War, but why is the flag flown as is? Alright. That flags fly over southern state houses. In 1961. Okie doke. Let's keep going with our job. Okie doke. The only questions were whether the many ceremonies and preparation could be organized without confusion, whether they could be carried out upon a dignified and elevated plane free from the stains of commercialism or vulgarity. Interesting. Like a stain of commercialism. God, that's worth another comment right there, because America's supposed to be so capitalist, right? But only for certain things that you're allowed to be capitalist for. It's interesting that in a capitalist country, commercialism is seen as a stain in 1960 rather than an opportunity to be taken advantage of. Or vulgarity, and whether above all they could be planned in such fashion as not to reawaken memories of old sectional antagonisms and political rancors, but instead to strengthen both the unity of the nation and the popular devotion to the highest purpose of the Republic, a Republic that, between Sumter and Appomattox, had watched hundreds of thousands of young men lay down their lives in devotion to a cause. A cause. Interesting what that cause is. Still, I mean, I don't want to put too many comments in the same front area because I have two in the first 2 pages. But they say a cause, without saying what that cause was. Um, it's just very political that they get to nicely talk about their side of it without actually confronting the conflict that is happening in the nation um, about racism. It's like, it's one of the reasons I hate politics and prefer activism, is because politics is about playing nice with your enemy. You know, it's about uh, sleeping in the same bed as your enemy and eating at the same table as your enemy, and just kind of not acknowledging that they are actually your enemy. Like, they really genuinely are. They want things that are evil for you, and that's not okay. But you can't fight them in the same way. You have to fight them not physically. You have to be sneaky about it, about how you're fighting them. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like it's the conservatives that always do violence to you first. And you just kind of have to, like, and the liberals and the moderates just have to take it. They're like, oh, we'll stage an anti-racism rally. Oh, what's that? Like, in, what's it, Huntington, Virginia, where a where someone drives a car through the protesters and kills a bunch of them. Yeah, Charlottesville. Neo-Nazi who killed Charlottesville protester sentenced to life in prison. You know, this is 2019, June 22nd, 2019. You know, it's still happening. It's kind of not that far away. The man who drove his car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia, killing one person and injuring 35, has been sentenced to spending the rest of his life in prison. The federal judge issued that sentence of life without the possibility of parole on Friday for self-proclaimed neo-Nazi James Fields Jr., 22, of Toledo, Ohio area. The judge's punishment, announced in a Charlottesville courtroom, came after numerous survivors delivered emotional testimony about the psychological and physical toll that the attack had caused. After the hearing, prosecutors described the 2017 the 2017 attack as heinous. 2017, guys, not that long ago. It was cold-blooded. It is motivated by deep-seated racial animus. Thomas Cullen, U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Virginia, told reporters. He said that Fields' lethal car plowing in was calculated, calling it a hate-inspired act of domestic terrorism. And Charlottesville is never going to be the same again, Cullen said. It will be with this community and with this Commonwealth of Virginia and this country for a very long time. Survivors who testified included Rosia Parker, a longtime civil rights activist in Charlottesville, and told the court that she watched the attack from just feet away. You could have done anything else but what you did, Parker said, according to the Associated Press. You deserve everything that you get. Legal filings presented to the judge on Friday, Fields' lawyers said, while he committed a terrible crime, asked the judge to also consider Fields' traumatic childhood and his mental illness, wrote Fields' federal public defender Lisa Loresh. Federal prosecutors had asked the judge for a life sentence for Fields. A plea deal brokered in March took away the possibility of the death penalty, and federal prosecutors and Fields' lawyers agreed that federal sentencing guidelines called for a life sentence. As part of the deal, Fields pleaded guilty to 29 of the 30 federal hate crimes he faced and is not eligible for parole. Prosecutors said that Fields' crimes were so horrendous that the maiming of innocence so severe that they outweigh any factors the defendant may argue from a basis for leniency. According to the sentencing document filed by Assistant U.S. Attorney Christopher Kavanaugh before the Friday hearing. Last week, Fields' attorneys asked for something shorter than a life sentence, citing Fields' age and his history of mental illness. Fields has already been convicted of separate state charges for murdering 32-year-old Heather Heyer and injuring dozens of other people. The jury in that case recommended a life sentence plus 419 years and $480,000 in fines. Sentencing in that case is set for July 15th. Yep. You know, that's what happens when you kill people for your hate-filled racist politics. And that still isn't a comfort to the families of the people that they killed or injured. And it certainly isn't, great for the person who died. It's really hard to, keep on studying this stuff as it gets closer and closer to the modern age. Because in the Civil War, you're okay with it being so far away. And even in World War II, I was born at a time when World War II was far enough away. I mean, it's still too close, right? It's still horrible. But it's people look different. It's not in color, many of the films. So it seems like it's from a different era, from a different world. And then when you just kind of walk it up to the 60s and it gets a little more familiar and you remember the Beatles, and the Beatles are still good, and you have all the color photos now, and Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and you remember reading that in early school. And then you just get really recent, where it's after I've graduated college, these hate crimes are still happening, and it just gets very close to you. That's when it starts getting difficult. And maybe that's just a benefit that historians have always had over modern activists or journalists, is because we get to deal with things that are far away in time, and maybe the other professions have never gotten that advantage or that benefit. So maybe maybe they can give me some advice on how to deal with it. All right, let's keep going. The only question is whether the many ceremonies in preparation could be organized without confusion, whether they could be carried out with a dignified and elevated plane free from the stains of commercialism or vulgarity, and whether above all they could be planned in such a fashion as to not reawaken memories of old sectional antagonisms and political rancors. Ooh, yeah, wow. But instead strengthen both the unity of the nation and the popular devotion to the highest purpose of the Republic, a republic that, between Sumter and Appomattox, had watched hundreds of thousands of young men lay down their life in devotion to a cause. The Civil War had never been forgotten. How could it be? To many communities, it was a memory recent in time and intimately close in space. Thousands of men and women had heard their elders tell stories of battles and sieges, had known something of the tottering marches of surviving veterans, had helped to decorate graves, to salute old banners, and to place battered weapons and other relics in museums to be treasured. They had seen monuments and ruins, and had heard all the old wartime songs. Nor did these memories wane. On the contrary, the approach of the centenary found interest in the war unmistakably rising. The fact was attributed in part to the more effective teaching of history in our schools, except the Daughters of the Confederacy, forcing all Southern school children to, honor and revere those who fought for slavery with the Confederacy, and putting up endless, incessant monuments to white soldiers of the Confederacy. Not to the black ones, for the Union, mind you. They're not interested in just remembering the people from the South that died. They're interested in remembering the white people from the South that fought for the Confederacy and then died. Okay. They had seen monuments and ruins and had heard all the old wartime songs. In part to the enhanced attention by the mass media to colorful segments of our national record, and above all to the achievement of a number of our ablest writers in making the war period live again, vivid and poignant. Stephen Crane, in The Red Badge of Courage, had been one of the first to show that a Civil War battle with its psychological overtones could be effectively presented in fiction. Such stories as Thomas Nelson Page's The Burial of the Guns, Hamlin Garland's The Return of a Private, J.W. DeForest's conversion of Miss Ravenel from secession to loyalty, with its vivid depiction of the bloody fighting at Port Hudson, and Harold Frederick's The Copperhead, had helped keep memories of the conflict alive. Yet shortly before the centenary, a veritable resonance? No, it's renaissance. Maybe it's the root word for Renaissance. A resonance of Civil War literature became evident. I think it's Renaissance, but it's misspelled, or it's spelled differently. Renaissance. Let me check. All right. Yeah, the revival of something that has been dormant. Another term for Renaissance. Okay. Renaissance. Okay. So it's just a different way to spell Renaissance, or a different term for the way that I learned it, which is the European spelling of Renaissance, apparently. Okie doke. Of Civil War literature became evident. It was led by Margaret Mitchell's tremendous novel Gone with the Wind, which had a little of the epic sweep, though not the power of Tolstoy's War and Peace, and which captivated millions. An equal success was scored by Stephen Vincent Bennett's eloquent narrative poem John Brown's Body, read in homes or recited in schoolrooms all over the lands. Such novels as Stark Young's So Red the Rose, its scenes set in wartime Mississippi, enjoyed a well-deserved success. Okay. So clearly very friendly to Lost Cause narrative here. All right. Meanwhile, in history and biography rose to more ambitious efforts in treating what a multitude of Americans regarded as the most epic chapters in our national record. James Ford Rhodes had compared the Civil War to the Peloponnesian contest that had inspired the pens of Thucydides and Plutarch. Okay. I mean, sure. One of them, it's interesting whenever you talk about the Civil War without the moral element now. Like, without the, fact that one of them is fighting to preserve, an actively evil institution, that, has breeding pens for slaves, stuff like that. In 1917, Rhodes brought out a single-volume history of the Civil War that won the Pulitzer Prize and possessed so much vitality of spirit and attractiveness of style that it was scanned with zest by young and old. Scanned. Interesting. It was not read, it was scanned. Scanned with zest. Our Pericles of the Great Crisis, Abraham Lincoln. I would not necessarily choose Pericles for this. Pericles is a very dogged, it's not often well considered in history for ancient Greek historians, but okay. Abraham Lincoln, he was a leader of Athens at the time, but he wasn't considered to be that good, I think. At least that's how Professor Lee communicated it to me, but I may have not studied Pericles enough. I'll have to brush up on my Pericles knowledge. Abraham Lincoln, who is always seen to most Americans as commanding in patient sagacity, as he was appealing in his personal traits, attracted a brilliant array of new biographers and interpreters, expert in the complex issues of the period, vigorous in their depiction of the pioneer West and wartime Washington, and able to narrate graphically the stirring events of Lincoln's time. The great 10-volume work Abraham Lincoln: A History by his secretaries Nicolay and Hay had kept an authoritative place. As early as 1928, Albert J. Beveridge had issued the first 2 volumes of an elaborate new life, unfortunately never finished. In 1926, Carl Sandburg's vivid and poetic volumes, Abraham Lincoln: The Prairie Years, had covered the leader's early developments. A new and solid foundation for Lincoln studies had been laid when, in 1953, the Abraham Lincoln Association of Springfield, Illinois, supported the publication of a 9-volume set, The Collected Works of Lincoln, effectively edited by Roy P. Bassler and others. Then, year after year, the huge shelf of Lincoln materials was enriched by books and that heightened interest in the approaching centennial. They included Sandburg's Lincoln: The War Years, Rich and Incident and Anecdote, and James G. Randall's masterly volumes Lincoln and the President, as well as the 1-volume life issued in 1952 by Benjamin P. Thomas, a work widely read and acclaimed. At the same time, in the years before the Civil War centennial, the military and naval history of the war was being given the most detailed and searching attention. It had always seemed to many a subject of peculiar interest, offering mysterious elements and controversial themes that could be debated endlessly. Throughout the nation, and even abroad, study groups called Civil War Roundtables sprang up, meeting regularly to hear speakers present disquisitions on strategy, tactics, and other topics that were always lively and sometimes expert. The older military histories of the war, the great set called Battles and Leaders of the Civil War, written in large part by Federal and Confederate officers, the Campaigns of the Civil War series, originally issued by Scribner's and John Codman's Ropes multi-volume story of the Civil War, had continued to hold a large public. So had such classic biographies as G.F.R. Henderson's Stonewall Jackson and the American Civil War, steadily reprinted since 1906, and the memoirs of Grant and Sherman, but these enduring volumes had in part become plainly outdated and needed supplementing. Yeah, so there's a lot. History often shocks us with how much there is. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is there are lots and lots of sources. Just finding the time to get through them all is, one of the things that we're doing right now. An almost overwhelming array of new editions and standard volumes with fresh editing and of wholly new books, biographies, and commanders, regimental histories, and studies of battles, great and small, appeared. Beside them were placed new works of great scope and depth, and which achieved circulations that, in view of their size and cost, were often astonishing. Americans, stimulated to a new curiosity, turned from John Brown's Body or Sandburg's Abraham Lincoln to Douglas Freeman's masterly R.E. Lee and Lee's Lieutenants, or from Gone with the Wind to Kenneth P. Williams' successful Lincoln Finds a General. Bit of a thing on how Lincoln keeps firing his generals. With good reason. Lincoln fired them because they were losing the war, and he needed to fire them and get someone new. Of course, that's a military history contentious topic about whether you should keep generals or fire them. There's a good YouTube video series for the Nimitz lecture series in Berkeley that is about, I think it's titled Why World War II Generals Were More Effective, or Generalship in World War II is More Effective Than in Vietnam. And it's because, in his opinion, we fired more generals whenever it wasn't working out. And it wasn't seen as like a great failure that they, lost their job and it was all this shame and you went back and you couldn't find a job afterwards in anything. It's that you just weren't right for that situation, or that particular front didn't fit your skill set and the way you thought about things, which is a very attractive idea in military history and generalship, that each situation requires a different mind that different person. It's one of the key things that kids, especially young boys, like. I think just all people like in general. It's like finding your niche, finding your place. It's one of the great victories of the Sentai model, where there's like 5 young Power Rangers, and you get to pick which one you're most like, which is an aspect of self-definition and self-exploration, which is, one of the things that you do when you're a human on this planet, and it's very important. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you shall be safe in 100 battles. It doesn't mean that you'll win 100 battles. It means that you'll be safe from harm in 100 battles, which means that you'll know when to retreat. Okay. Also, Sun Tzu is talking to generals when he was saying that. He's not talking to, like, soldiers. He actually uses soldiers as, like, delaying actions quite often. And they die, of course. Or they give up, whichever. Surrender. Surrender so you can live. Alright, by the time Centennial Observance has impended, it could be said that the whole country was saturated in the lore and legend of the Civil War period. Probably never before in history had so large a population fixed their discerning attention upon one figure as our people had given to Lincoln. The libraries built upon his name contained as many titles as those devoted to Napoleon or Shakespeare. Probably never before had so many people shown an informed and critical interest in 4 years of mobilization, campaigns, victories, and defeats. Most Americans believed that this was more emphatically our war than any conflict involving foreign allies or antagonists could ever be. This fact offered manifest advantages to planners of centennial commemorations. Popular interest amounting to enthusiasm was already aroused. Some unfortunate distortions were evidently in this interest. It attached itself too heavily to military personages and events, too slightly to the civil history of the quadrennium. Quadrennium, that's an interesting word. Alright, I'm going to look that up too. I think it's the 4 years. Quadrennium, a period of 4 years. Yep, that's right. Okay, good. Quadrennium. The demand for depictions of Antietam, Shiloh, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg was insatiable. Too little demand was made manifest for study and appreciation of the Great Emancipation Proclamation of 1962. Little interest was shown in study of the Homestead Act, the Pacific. Oh, just chatting, huh? Anime Seahorse. Yep. Just chatting about homework. Chats, normal chats, non extremely contentious historical chats. So yeah, I think it's. I want to make another comment here, but it's still too close to the middle, or to the front, to my other comments for my class. But the demand for depictions of Antietam, Shiloh, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg was insatiable. Too little was the demand manifest for study and appreciation of the Great Emancipation Proclamation of 1862. And little interest was shown in the study of the Homestead Act, the Pacific Railroad Act, or the Land Grant College Act, which brought so many great universities into existence. Yeah, I did not realize that was part of the Civil War. The social, cultural, and economic history of the war era were neglected in favor of drum, bugle, and cannon smoke. Yes, I totally agree with this. Civil War history is mostly like reenactors nowadays. Everybody knew what Beauregard had done during the conflict. How many knew what part Walt Whitman had played? But distortions of this sort were not so much a disadvantage to Centennial planners as a challenge. They could be met and rectified. All right, now we have to look up Walt Whitman. American poet, essayist, and journalist, a humanist. He was part of the transition between transcendentalism and realism. Civil War poet and caregiver. Although best known for his work as an American poet, he's also remembered for the care that he gave thousands of the sick and injured soldiers. In Washington, D.C., hospitals during the Civil War. In December of 1862, Walt Whitman first traveled to the city from his home in Brooklyn, New York, to search through the hospital wards for his brother, George Washington Whitman, who the family believed had been seriously injured in the Battle of Fredericksburg. Not finding his brother there, the 43-year-old poet traveled on to Virginia, where he was relieved to find an only slightly wounded George at the Union Army camp in Falmouth, across from the Rappahannock River from the site of the actual battle. Greatly affected by the suffering he witnessed firsthand, Whitman then decided to establish residence in Washington and to care for these sick and wounded soldiers. For the next 3 years, he visited patients daily in various Civil War hospitals located through the city. Whitman spent hours listening to their stories, writing letters home to family members, scribbling down their needs on small notebooks he carried with him, and bringing them gifts such as fresh oranges or licorice candies. Some of Whitman's best-known collections of poetry, including Drum Taps and Sequel to Drum Taps, as well as the poem O Captain, My Captain, were inspired by this cumulative experience. Yeah. Dope. You can always help. Always just go and help. Okie doke. Walt Whitman opposed slavery and supported the Free Soil platform, advocating that only those territories that outlawed slavery should be allowed into the Union. Yeah. Licorice is gross. I mean, if you are dying in a Civil War hospital, I feel like any sugar is, better than nothing. It also keeps really well. That's the thing, is like, at this time period before refrigeration, you want something that can last for a long time. And also, it's probably all they had, to be honest. I mean, is 1863 probably. Fredericksburg is also a horrible battle. Like, Fredericksburg was like, it was basically throwing entire groups of people across a river into like an entrenched fortification position that the Confederates had, where they had stone walls, and like waves and waves and waves of Union troops just walked across a field to them and just kept dying. A visitor to the battlefield described the battle to Abraham Lincoln as a butchery. It was one of the first like horrific failings of strategy in the Civil War, where they think that Civil War historian from like the 1980s described it as a perfect example of the great intellectual failure of strategy during this time period for their relationship with the technology that was available at the time. They thought that in order to concentrate their fire, they had to concentrate their men, but their guns were good enough that you didn't have to do that anymore. Like, you don't have to, put 150 Marines in one line and have them walk across a field in World War II or in modern warfare for like Afghanistan or Iraq or Desert Storm, because all their guns are accurate and good enough to shoot their targets from farther away, and they don't have to expose themselves to fire openly. They can take cover and then deliver that fire effectively. So yeah, let's just go over it a little bit. It was fought December 11th to 15th in 1862 in and around Fredericksburg, Virginia, in the Eastern Theater of the American Civil War. The combat, I'm just reading the Wikipedia here, between the U.S. Union Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General Ambrose Burnside, and the Confederate Army of North Virginia under General Robert E. Lee. It was one of the sites of Robert E. Lee's most brilliant victories, both like at the initial battle and then also after the battle. My girlfriend is into paleontology and biology more. She's, she does dinosaur things. So a little older than my history. So we have a contest often about who is the oldest, who does older things, and she always wins because the numbers that she has to deal with of time are so massive. It like blows my mind. Anyway, I just try to work with the human stuff. That's my focus, which is, also horrible and bad. So, all right, so let's just go over it. It included initial futile frontal attacks by the Union Army on December 13th against entrenched Confederate soldiers along a sunken wall on heights behind the city. This is a stone wall, so bullets can't really go through it, and it's one of the classic examples of the defensive advantage, right? And at this time period, there's a strong defensive advantage, and there would be, I'd say, all the way up to and including World War One. The only time technology offered an offensive advantage was when tanks came around in the Blitzkrieg in World War II. But if you're walking, you can't shoot a gun as well as someone who's hiding behind a stone wall that goes up to their chest and can shoot you easily, and all they have to do is stand there and focus on reloading. This was also true famously before the Napoleonic Wars, and then Napoleon came along and changed the game and took what was normally a very defensive advantaged combat state and then moved it to an offensive advantaged combat state by his use of cavalry and basically massed cavalry charges and lots of cannons, and also field cannons. But of course you can make your whole doctorate and career about Napoleon's strategic brilliancy, quote unquote. And also just his ability to attack things, his confidence to just be yeah, I'm just going to attack them. I'm going to see what they do. Okay. So let's keep going. Actually, let's go back. Yeah, basically it was just a series of slow frontal charges against a stone wall that do not work. And then he tries to go around the back and he loses confidence, and Robert E. Lee attacks him with a force that's a third the size of their force and wins famously. And it's a disaster. Fredericksburg is a huge disaster for the North and sets them back so much. All right. Some unfortunate distortions, yes. The social, cultural, and economic history of the war era were neglected in favor of drum, bugle, and cannon smoke. But distortions are not a disadvantage, they're a challenge, and they can be met and rectified. But not all the circumstances of the time were favorable to an orderly and constructive management of Civil War Centennial. The year the commission began in 1961 found friction over racial issues more threatening in various parts of the nation than ever before. Gee, I wonder why. Assisted by many white people, was continuing a drive for equal rights on many fronts. Mass arrests were met by legal defenses provided by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and similar bodies. These events sent a wave of resentful feelings across many parts of the South and the borderland. It's weird that they can write that sentence and not immediately see that the South is actively politically evil. This is a weird thing that they're oh, it's resentful feeling. This wave inevitably affected many of the activities planned and many of the demonstrations that were arranged. It had been impossible to dissociate the racial issue from the Civil War while it raged, as evidence of the 1963 New York draft riots, but it is impossible now to dissociate it entirely from the Centennial commemoration. Gee, I wonder if they're about the same thing. Oh, yeah. Uh, I mean, it's good to have a good relationship. That's the thing. Good relationships improve every part of your body, and like, not everything is about being like quote unquote smart or quote unquote intelligent. There's lots of different types of intelligence. There's lots of different types of smart. There's also like learning disabilities that like me and all of my partners have had to go through also. Like it's not as cut and dried as high school kind of wants you to believe. Like, I think everyone is smart in different ways, and the society just like carves out certain spaces for the kinds of smarts that they like and can use, basically for political reasons, which oftentimes is like, are you good at math and science? If you're good at math and science, then we can use you to fight the Cold War, to give us like tech weapons that we can use against other countries. Are you good at numbers and math or financing? That's great. We'll put you in Wall Street so that we can continue to make like insane profits relative to like via financial manipulation relative to the rest of the world, doing international banking and being like one of the central hubs of financing uh, internationally. And it's up for debate whether financing as a concept is even moral in the first place, because what you're doing is you're essentially like, the banks are lying about how much money they have, and whenever you try to get all of your money back, they go bankrupt, and then like we still haven't tested the FDIC guarantees on the Federal Reserve's ability to reimburse every bank that fails if another Great Depression happened. So it's all just faith. It's all just imaginary. It's like, if you've ever seen It's a Beautiful Life, and they have that run on the bank with the Great Depression, and all those people come into the bank and they say like, hey, I want my money that I have that I gave to the bank back so that I can afford food. And the bank is like, well, I don't have that money. I lent it out so that Jim over there could make a new sign for his business. Um, it's not Jim, it's someone else, but they make a sign for their business, and he explains how banks operate and what the financial system is made of to this group of like, people in the 1930s. And when you actually look at what that is, if any private citizen did that, that wasn't a bank, that would be immoral. That would be like not a good thing for them to do. Um, like charging your friends and family interest is seen as immoral, but when a financial institution does it, it's totally fine. You know, give me $100 now, and I'll pay you $150 later. And in that way, you can just manufacture money. You can monetize time, and that in and of itself kind of plays with what money is. And it's whatever people agree that it is, and it's just the whole system kind of breaks apart very quickly into a series of beliefs, a series of imaginary constructions. And that's what happens whenever Mexico loses, 90% of its estimated value, because all value is estimated value. All right. I mean, not all of it. Some of it's food and shelter, but even that has estimated value that's tacked onto it. Okay, so let's continue. Okie doke. The year the commemoration began in 1961 found friction over racial issues more threatening in various parts of the nation than ever before. Like the whole civil rights movement and Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and so many others that I haven't studied the civil rights movement recently enough to still remember from my college days. Assisted by many white people, the Negro was continuing a drive for equal rights on many fronts. Mass arrests were met by legal defenses. These events sent waves of resentful feeling across many parts of the South and the borderland. This was inevitably affected by many of the activities planned and many of the demonstrations that were arranged. It had been impossible to dissociate the racism. Leadership of the U.S. Civil War Centennial Commission felt that it could permit no compromise on this question. Thousands of Negroes had served in during the Civil War in the federal armies, and thousands had lost their lives under the national banner. Not only had emancipation been one of the great turning points of the war, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments had grown out of the war and were an integral part of the peace arrangements in concluding it. Yes, this is good. See, I'm so glad that they wrote that paragraph. That makes me happy to study history. The Negro had every right to share in the Centennial on equal terms with the white man. Okay, so this was like an anti-segregation thing also. It's weird that they keep on calling it the Negro in 1961. A little uncomfortable there. But, you know, at least the message is good. At least they're trying to to be equal, even though their language still has to catch up with the times. Anyway, unfortunately, some men and communities were slow in recognizing this, and the commission had to exercise constant vigilance to see that no humiliating sights were put upon the people of the Negro race. Constant vigilance. Constant vigilance. That's what you should always have for civil rights things in your community. Constant vigilance. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, street smarts is important. Street smarts is real smarts. Survival is key. Alright, it also had to see that no ceremonies were used in a contentious way that would hurt the feelings of conservatives in the uneasy readjustments that were taking place. Really? Huh. Hurt the feelings of conservatives. Gosh, are we worried about that? Like, for real? Like, are we? God, I really want to make this one of the comments in my classes is like, it's so weird that we go out of our way to not hurt the feelings of conservatives because we're so nice, aren't we? That we have to take care of them. We just feel sad for them. We feel sorry for them. And that sympathy and empathy is what softens our blows, which shouldn't be softened at all, because they're certainly not softening their blows against us. All right. Maybe I'm just angry at conservatives, which is, you should be. You should genuinely be. All right. In the uneasy readjustments that were taking place, the situation was difficult and some initial fumbling took place, but after that the position of the National Commission became as clear and firm as it was liberal. Ooh, wow. Interesting. As clear and firm as it was liberal. Okay. Some spicy. We're getting some spicy language from the Federal Commission here. Federal Commission is very clear on how liberal it's being right now. It's like, oh yeah, we're liberal. Go fuck yourself. Yeah, screw you. Wow, that's such an interesting paragraph to write in a federal document. Yeah, peace. Thanks for dropping by, Seahorse. Yeah, that's so clear. I guess I'm not used to federal documents being this clear. It's clear and firm as it was liberal. Huh. I'm fascinated by I'm fascinated by the tone of I'm fascinated by the what's it? Partisan tone? I think so. The partisan tone that this has, that I see no ceremonies were used in a contentious way that would hurt the feelings of conservatives in the uneasy readjustments that were taking place. The situation was difficult and some initial fumbling took place, but after that, the position of the National Commission became as clear and firm as it was liberal. Passage. Fully acknowledging their identity as a liberal political force, political and intellectual force, um, while carefully avoiding the feelings of conservatives. Um, yeah, the authors, potentially plural, because or makes a special point to focus on African American rights, but does not mention their feelings their emotional state at all. Rights and humiliation. Okay, so the author makes special point to focus on the African Americans' rights and humiliation, but it does not mention their emotional state or what um, huh, caring for the feelings of conservatives would have on them. So the author makes special point to focus on African American rights and humiliation, but does not mention their emotional state, but does not address the conflict or the conflict conflict that caring for the feelings of conservatives would have on hmm Yeah, it's just a difference between who is cared for and who is served. You know, it's like there's still distance between how the federal government interacts with the African American community, even the white liberals of that community. Um, it's like they want to fulfill um, their ideological and philosophical goals for themselves while not taking all of the steps into account. It's like the people they still feel closest to emotionally are other white conservatives. And they're like, oh, I disagree with you, but we're still caring for your experience. And the black people are just seen as this like other. They're seen as this separate group. It's not all the way integrated. Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna, I don't know, maybe I just hate politics. Maybe I just think that politics itself and like taking care of your enemy is not effective. Um, but I guess that's what you have to have in order to play ball with the group is you have to work with your enemies. All right. I'm gonna send this. I think that's it for me. We did about an hour and 20 minutes, so um, I'm gonna take a break and get some food, and I will see you guys later. All right, peace.